Hi, everyone. I am Corion, your witch in residence, and I'm getting to do something that I've waited to do for a very, very long time. As some of you may or may not know, I have an amazing friend in Kamran Pasha, and we finally found a video that we wanted to do together simply because it's a great film and we thought there would be a lot to discuss. So, if you guys would please put your hands together for my very close friend, Kamran Pasha. Kamran, assalamu alaikum. How are you doing
Walaikum
today?
salam. Peace be upon you. I'm doing great, and I'm sorry I have not been on before. You have a wonderful channel. It deserves to get more viewership, and I hope more people are going to watch this today because we're going to talk about something really fun that I wouldn't have watched had it not been for you suggesting it.
Well, thank you. So the video I'd like to discuss today is Dorian Gray from the 2007 BBC make. They put it out as a movie.
Yep.
And you know what? I thought it was very interesting because I know how much you enjoy horror movies.
Yes.
But this is kind of a different type of horror movie.
It's a gothic movie, which is what the book was. I mean,
exactly.
The book is a gothic thriller. It's very different, but it's scary.
Exactly. See, the way I look at it is there's three types of horror, really. There's the jump scare kind of horror, where something pops out and goes boo or what have you.
Yeah.
There's the gory kind of stuff where, bits of people and whatnot are flying everywhere. But then there's this kind of horror, the horror of the uncanny, the thinking man's horror, if you will, where you stop to realize what a dark thing this could potentially be. And it kind of chills you to the core. Now, of course, Dorian Gray, the very famous book, published well before you and I were on the scene. But it definitely speaks to not just a yearning, but a quest for immortality and what that would look like, really.
And what the price is of that.
Exactly. And what I think it also talks to a little bit is the philosophy idea of if you could live forever and you could do whatever you wanted without consequence, what would you choose to do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And what's amazing is this comes from a book that's written over 100 years ago, right? The height of the Victorian era. And let me just give a little background about my personal relationship with this story, which I think I mentioned to you. So I've written a horror movie, a vampire movie, in which Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker are central characters, right? And it's a movie about Elizabeth Bathory. I know you're familiar with the terrifying and powerful countess who bathed in the bloods of hundreds of women to achieve immortality, right?
Right, and you and I prefer something like Coke Zero or whatever to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's other ways to do it, or Sufi meditation. There's a way to do it. The rainbow body, that's a better way to do it, right? But so in my script, which is one of my favorite scripts, and one day, God willing, I will actually make it. It's about how young Bram Stoker, young Oscar Wilde, join forces to defeat Elizabeth Bathory, who's been turned into a vampire from her blood rituals, and she's unleashed on England. And in the process of this, you watch the ideas of how Dracula is formed in Bram Stoker's mind, and for Oscar Wilde, you see how the picture of Dorian Gray is born at the end of the script after they defeated, the Countess. You jump forward several years and they both published their novels, right? And so the picture of Dorian Gray was central to that screenplay. And what made it, as I was researching that project, I didn't know as much about Oscar Wilde as I should have. And what I had discovered, to my delight, was that Bram Stoker and Oscar Wilde did know each other. They were rivals. They actually hated each other. And Bram Stoker married a woman that had been Oscar Wilde's lover, right? She had left Oscar. She had left Oscar because of some of his lifestyle, and she went to Bram. And so these two men hated each other, right? Because they had a thing for the same woman, right? And so she's central to the show, to the movie. But I knew that part. I discovered that part. And then I went back and I started reading more Oscar Wilde. And I was blown away by this man. I mean, this was one of the wisest, wittiest writers I've ever come across. And so much of the script is just literally Oscar Wilde coming up with his one-liners in response to the vampire.
I had a book just Oscar Wilde being Oscar Wilde, right?
Yeah, Bob being Oscar Wilde, and he literally took over. He's supposed to be the side character in a movie about Bram Stoker, and he took over the whole script because that's what he does. That's what Oscar Wilde does. He's the guy that walks into the party as the guest and takes over, which is kind of what the picture of Dorian Gray, a lot of that is.
Exactly. So let's give a quick little summary for those who have not yet seen the movie, but you all really should.
So, it really is a good movie. It really is.
Yeah. So it starts out and we have a young Dorian Gray who has inherited a home from his grandfather.
I hope you'll find everything to your liking, sir. Nothing's changed since I was a boy.
His family is basically all passed. He's an orphan. And he is brought into Victorian society being a gentleman of, assuming, a little bit of the aristocracy.
Yeah, he's not a lord. They make that clear, but he's a man of means. He's obviously an aristocrat. He's wealthy.
Exactly. And he makes very powerful friends.
I see you've met our charming host. Just pay no attention to anything he tells you.
How rude. Henry Wotton. Victoria, my wife. My aunt, alas, you know.
Who, are both moral individuals and some who have given themselves over to more or less whatever makes them happy.
Yeah, sort of jaded, hedonistic people of the Victorian era. They were sort of, frustrated with the fakery of society and lived a very extreme opposite life, because publicly they have their persona as gentlemen and gentlewomen, but privately they're doing their own thing.
Right. And along the way, he meets a gentleman named Basil who paints his portrait.
Is that really how I look? It's just so lifelike.
And his portrait, it seems as though Basil is pouring all of himself into making this portrait as perfect as possible. And he creates this beautiful work of art that is hauntingly beautiful and is done fantastically in the movie. It's actually a very gorgeous piece of artwork that I'd love to find out if it's still available on auction.
Yeah, I'd love the prop master probably has it in the storage somewhere. I'd pay to own that prop. It's not beautiful.
Right. And over time, we start to learn that anything that happens to Dorian instead happens to the portrait. And
which includes physical injury. It includes immoral corruption that's happening internally. You start seeing on the portrait, and including age.
Exactly. And as he falls into this hedonistic lifestyle, we see the portrait take that on. And eventually he's so horrified by his own visage reflected back, he has to put that away. Now, in my retrospective on The Craft, I actually commented how important mirrors were in that time.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually almost an alchemical relationship there that I think is very important to mention.
Oh, it is. Mirrors are central to Sufi imagery, and we'll get into that. Yeah,
exactly, because traditionally mirrors were actually silver backed, and silver is considered the purest of the elements. So it was showing you the purest version of you. Yeah. Well, I think this portrait is showing the unfortunate, truest version of what Dorian has taken on.
Yeah.
And over time, he does everything he possibly can to hide the darkness within his soul, really, from others seeing this portrait.
Yeah.
Everything from taking it off a display.
Where's my picture?
To hiding it in an attic. To eventually barring the gate to the attic. And preventing anyone from getting in it for fear of someone seeing how truly evil he has become.
And if someone sees it, as he says in the movie, if I tell you my secret, I'll have to kill you. And that's kind of true.
Exactly. And we actually see him as the young man of his 20s, going through the start into his, descent into immorality. And then we take it further in that we catch up with him 20 years later. And all of his friends, the people he has played with over the years, have gotten much older.
Well, here I am.
Maybe a little bit wiser. I mean, some of that flame of rebellion is kind of out in that age. Yeah.
Right. And he left actually because the artist demanded to see the portrait, tried to brush past him to see it. And he actually wound up having to kill one of his very best friends, who he seemed to almost have a relationship with that was going a little bit beyond the norm.
Well, yeah, and as we may know, the controversy around Oscar Wilde was that he was in many ways he is Dorian Gray, and we'll get into that. But he was put on trial for homosexuality, right? When the Victorian era, let's just say some of his personal life got out. I mean, he was living a very bohemian life privately, just as Dorian Gray is, and just as the people of this class were at the time. But his enemies got that out, and he had to go through this very humiliating public trial about his sexual life, right? Which kind of destroyed him as a public figure for the rest of his life, which is very shameful. It's a shameful moment in history. This great artist had to endure this nonsense, right?
Absolutely.
But that's also very much shown in this movie. I mean, it's not as clear, I think, in the novel. I think it's more because you can't be openly talking about
male homosexuality in the Victorian era.
Victorian era. You can only imply it. Right? But here it's shown in the movie that he has a tryst with the artist.
Not sure that I've ever fully expressed my gratitude.
The male artist, and and that's kind of always hidden within Oscar Wilde's work.
It's subtle. I think they in the movie they played it up a little more. But it was also still incredibly tasteful. And that's one of the things I did like about this movie. Even in the most depraved things that go on in the movie, it's all filmed in an incredibly tasteful manner that is showing that, yes, this is dark. Yes, this is not ethical behavior that either of us would condone. But they do it in a way that makes it approachable.
Well, and it's also, remember, this is the elite of the elite. They don't want to see themselves as animals, as they perceive the local populace as animals. So their hedonism is very beautifully done for their own sense of aesthetic.
Exactly. And this is actually part of the reason why I wanted to bring you in on this. Very commonly, you will speak of the club in Hollywood, which I feel almost identically matches the aristocracy put on display in the film.
Correct. And in all levels.
Exactly.
Including the occult.
Exactly. And I thought that you would have that very unique and wonderful perspective to bring to this in terms of a modern take, if you will, on stuff that we still apparently are dealing with 100 years later or more.
Well, because these elites have been the same. I mean, you go back to ancient Babylon. I mean, this is nothing new here under the sun, right? In the ancient Babylon, the let's just say the aristocratic elements of them were very much involved in all the hedonistic activities as well as the occult activities. It's just kind of goes with the territory in every generation.
Exactly. And I thought it was also very interesting that they tried to portray the fantastical nature of this portrait as not intentionally fantastical, that it was almost an accidentally fantastical event.
Yeah, I mean, there's no moment where he makes a deal with the devil, but this movie is about making a deal with the devil. There's a moment where you can see that a change is happening.
Dorian wouldn't freely part with his soul. Dorian.
But it's very subtle, and that's the beauty of this film, is that it is very subtly done, right? There's no explanation for why this has happened. It's kind of implied he made some kind of deal with the devil, but when did he do it? How did he do it? Even he doesn't seem to know, but he's going with it.
Exactly. And I thought it was pretty fantastic, the filming of this. They didn't do a lot of...
Oh my God.
Right. They didn't do a lot of crazy location shots. Most of it really happens in, a back street in London, a film, like a house that could very easily have existed in Victoria.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's a location, some nice place in Essex or whatever. So yeah,
exactly. They didn't have to go too far to make this. It was shot simply but very elegantly, and it really discusses that concept of, if you could do anything, what would you choose to do? Right. Sure. I mean, I know me personally, if given the option to do just about anything, I'd probably spend 99% of my time helping people, simply because that's what I like to do.
Well, that's your character. The joke I have, which is maybe not that much of a joke, is that I probably would become Dorian Gray, and because everything that was repressed within me would come out, and maybe that's one of the reasons God's like, hey, we're going to put some restraint on what you can do.
See, I don't know. I've known you for a long time, Cameron, and while I definitely think that the the wives of Hollywood would be very, very wise to lock up their daughters for the duration. I do think he would probably help out people and probably spend a lot of time doing good work, because that's just your nature as well.
Well, as we there again, because there's so many parables in this movie, right? And in the story, one of the ideas that is explored is that wealth doesn't change you. Wealth, and that includes life, as in health and eternal life. It doesn't change you. It expands you. It makes you more of what you are, right? And that's the choices that Dorian made to put himself on the wrong path happened before the mystical event happens with the
Absolutely.
He's already on the wrong path. He was a good person who chose to go on the wrong path, right? And he was also had a little voice in his ear, and we'll get to that. Colin Firth is amazing as that.
Yes.
But that's the thing, is that had he been given this gift when he was still the compassionate, idealistic
young man who just came to London,
who falls in love with a girl who's beneath his status and he doesn't care, then that would have expanded. But that's not the deal the devil gives you. They wait until you're on the wrong path, and then the deal is given to you.
Right. And I will say that, the movie does try to paint an interesting portrait, if you will, of a man who is almost justified in his fall. Right? We see that very clearly. His grandfather was beating him.
I didn't mean.
Yeah, he's an abused child. Yeah.
Right. And that he was very much alone and craves friendship and craves a community. And then we're given, again, his tempter in the form of a good friend, like a good friend who he meets, who starts him smoking, who starts him drinking, who starts him down that path of depravity. More or less, not only because he feels that it just somehow justifies his own depravity, but because he thinks it's funny to take a young man and corrupt him.
Nobody is amused this time, Henry.
I'll talk to him.
Exactly. And it's actually said at the very first meeting that they have at this banquet where he meets him, Colin Firth playing, I'm now blanking on the character's name. Harry, was it Harry or?
I believe it's Harry. Yes.
Yes. So who's the wealthy patron that puts on the wrong path. The first time he meets him, he says to him, I'll try to paraphrase it correctly. It was a wonderful line in the movie where he says, essentially youth is wasted on the wrong people, because you have the two things that matter right now, which is you've got beauty and you've got freedom, right? It was that kind of idea. Yeah. And so there's very much the sense that Harry, the Colin Firth's character, is someone that's living vicariously in some ways. Yes, he's an immoral man himself, but he's also trapped in a happy marriage. He's trapped in social status. He can't actually do all of the things that Dorian gets to do, right? So he gets to vicariously live through him. And it's also paid off. It's a very well-written script. It's paid off at the very end, which talks about how, Dorian, who disappears for many years, goes off on all of his adventures worldwide, has been writing letters. And you see Colin Firth keep...
I have entered the tombs of dead nations, ridden with our last savage tribes. I feel the brilliance of every moment, the splendor of existence and its awful brightness. Is the edge of a blade, this desperate will to see, touch. Dearest Harry, you taught me that life must burn with a hard flame. Its light does not blind me.
Reading the letters, he's living vicariously through his adventures overseas, right? And that says something about how tragic this figure is that, in some ways it's the Abrahamic idea of Satan, right? Is that he can't be that ideal person that Adam was, so he's going to corrupt Adam.
Absolutely. And it's actually interesting too. His friend Basil actually reminds him about Harry's character that
you shouldn't believe every word Harry says. He doesn't.
Correct. That's it. And that's the thing that a young, easily sort of manipulated man doesn't understand. This guy's saying all kinds of nonsense and poisoning his mind, but he's not actually acting on it, which is, again, reflective of Hollywood. Hollywood says all kinds of things of what you need to do.
Exactly. Do what I say, but not what I do.
Correct. Yeah.
And it even pays off later in the script as well when we meet Harry's daughter.
an illusion.
Bravo.
Well, you both cut the world to pieces, don't you? Thank you for the cigarette.
Unusual woman.
She ought to be. She's my daughter.
And Dorian seems to be falling for Harry's daughter, and Harry's daughter seems to be falling for Dorian.
Yeah.
And, you know, this seriously concerns Harry because he knows exactly the kind of depravity he created in Dorian. And he's now watching this play out in his own tragedy as well.
Well, and that's the great thing. The great thing to do in the movie, there's a time jump about halfway through the movie, or even 3/4 of the way through the movie.
Yeah.
There's a time jump where, and that's from the tragedy. I think Rebecca Hall plays the daughter. Is only in like maybe 20 minutes of the movie, and she's so wonderful. She should have been in a lot more of the movie, right?
Yes.
But there's a time jump where he goes off on his adventures, comes back, and now we've seen that Harry he's out of his unhappy marriage because the wife is dead, but he's now finally found something real to love, his daughter. You know, he's living in this fake life, unhappy, miserable, unloved, unloving, and now he has a daughter he loves. And suddenly everything that he put, Dorian to do to other people's daughters is a problem for him.
Exactly. And I mean, speaking from my own experience, having a daughter definitely does change how you view the women that you would choose to date, shall we say? Or even just how you would approach that, because you start realizing, well, these are somebody else's daughters too. And, I feel like you almost get that sense from Harry after a certain point where he's realized what a monster he's created and actually starts going out of his way to figure out exactly what the nature of this monster is. He starts bribing.
As I recall, Mr. Grey stored it in the attic. He certainly wanted protecting
people, starts going into research, trying to figure out where Dorian is getting this power from so he can stop it.
And and without revealing all of that, people should watch the whole movie. But there he suffers a loss at the end as well. Harry there's a karmic comeuppance from him in the final scene. When he's on that phone call, right? And I'll reveal that phone call where his relationship with his daughter, we now understand where it is as a result of these events. He's lost the one pure thing in his life for something he set in motion.
Exactly. I think that's kind of an important and wonderful story. And I feel like even, from an Abrahamic perspective, this definitely has that, the very clearly laid out morals. But from a Wiccan perspective, where we don't necessarily have an absolute evil or an absolute good, what we do have is what we call the concept of choice and consequence, that you have to accept that you are ultimately responsible for all your actions, and that the consequences you face for those are your own doing.
Correct.
So we actually see that play out with each of the characters as well. So I feel like this is also a bit of a morality tale for people who don't necessarily fall into that Abrahamic mindset, because we also have Harry made the choices he made and found the repercussions of it. Dorian made the choices he made and found the repercussions of it along.
And Basil did as well. Yeah,
exactly. In fact, we actually only see Basil come to an unfortunate end after he gives in to his impulses.
Exactly.
Right.
And, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, and I really feel like that speaks to the Victorian concept of trying to live beyond your own personal beastly nature and live at a higher standing, beyond that kind of morality, that ethics. And yet this is what's spoken versus what actually happens, which I definitely feel relates into Hollywood a great deal. We've both seen actors who would profess certain morals and certain ideals to us, but secretly are doing a whole bunch of other things in the background.
Of course. What's interesting, I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the fact that it was Oscar Wilde that wrote this, in the original story. And, you feel like you're watching Oscar Wilde on screen here. The young man actually looks a lot like Oscar Wilde. The actor who's playing him, Ben Barnes, I believe, is a very good actor. And, the long flowing hair. Oscar was, he was a celebrity in this time. And, he was a handsome guy, and very charming. He was very much the dandy that's portrayed here. So what's fascinating here is Oscar, this is the only novel Oscar Wilde wrote, to my knowledge. What it is this is a self-reflection the whole time. He is the libertine Or at least that was his public persona, is the libertine of all these characters. But he's actually a man. I mean, Oscar Wilde was actually a profoundly philosophical man who hid behind caustic. He's in some ways he's Harry. He's hiding his nature behind caustic comments about human nature, right? Because he's deeply wounded. Oscar Wilde is a deeply wounded person who can't reveal his pain, so he's got to put on this persona, right? And that's in many ways all of these characters. It made me really, really respect and admire Oscar Wilde for the difficulties of being a man of that level of depth in an environment like that, trapped in a lifestyle that even he's not happy with. It. The misery of Dorian Gray is his misery, exactly. and he's exploring it on a profound level. And this is someone that has been trapped in the world of his own creation and is becoming self-aware. So this is a novel. All the characters are Oscar Wilde, and that's why it's so fascinating to me.
Absolutely. You can almost imagine that these individual characters are having debates on morality inside Oscar Wilde's head.
Yeah. These are literally the voices in his head and parts of his soul. I mean, there is a very good man in there to even be asking these questions.
Absolutely. And I mean, I do think that he really got the rough end of the whole scenario. Yep. I mean, look, I think you and I both believe very much that people should be free to live their authentic lives, so long as, of course, living that life does not cause harm to anyone else.
I mean, that's my absolutely. People often think because I'm a conservative Muslim in my private life that I am judgmental towards others. No, you live your life authentically. Don't hurt other people. I don't care. Your life is between you and Allah, the creator of the universe. Right? Exactly. It's not between you and me. It's how you interact with people that I care about. And so, and that startles people because they project certain things on a conservative religious person. Look, no, that's not how I approach things. The conservative religious part is how I'm trying to be for myself. Not even succeeding at that. And I'm barely succeeding at that. What do I have time to say about anything else?
I think we all try to, the way it was always described to me is that the goal may be, we may all seek perfection, but the real goal is progression towards that perfection, right? We're all human. We are all going to make mistakes along the way, but how we deal with those, how we behave when we have erred, matters almost as much as us trying not to err in the first place.
And which is the lesson now of the picture of Dorian Gray, because he is disconnecting from his ability to learn. He can't learn because even his physical scars are removed from him. We talk about scars, physical, emotional, they stay with you. There's a reminder and there's a lesson. He's removed them and placed them into the painting, to the portrait, right? And so he can't grow. That's why he's so miserable at the end, because he has all these experiences without any growth. The growth is all outside of him, inside, and it's something that's turning into something very ugly. But even he can't face that ugliness; it's hidden away, right?
Exactly. You're actually hitting on a very interesting point in the Wiccan Read, which is more or less a codification of the general morals and ethics that witches behave on. One of the important lines in it is, "To learn, one must suffer." Right? We do not learn through ease; we learn through bad things happening and learning not to do it again.
It's as simple as you're the child that touches the hot stove. I remember as a kid, as a small child, I remember my dad smoked, and one day I was alone in the room and I picked up his matchbox. I was just so fascinated. I was love these old school, like he was like that. I was so fast as a child. Must have been 5 or 6 years old, watching him hit the matchbox.
Spark.
Right.
Yeah,
spark. So I kept playing. I didn't know how to do it. I was 5 years old, and I did it, and I did it, and I burned my finger. And thank God I didn't burn the house down, right? Because it fell out of my hand and it blew out, right? But I never forgot burning my finger on. To this day, I can remember I can remember what the room was like.
Exactly.
Right? It was literally burned into my memory, that lesson.
Right. We learn by discomfort. And Dorian doesn't get that because he has no discomforts. He has nothing no lesson will ever stick with him. And that's an interesting place to be in. And what I also thought was very interesting is the choice to effectively make Dorian immortal. Especially because when you think about it, at that time in history, there were 2 very famous stories of immortals running around Europe. Because we had the Count of Saint Germain, which I would argue is very, very close to what we get in Dorian Gray.
And many would argue the Count of Saint Germain is a true story. There's still gentlemen today.
Exactly. And for the record, if he is wandering around and watching this video, please comment because we'd love to have you on.
Come on. I mean, I would love to have the Count of Saint Germain come and do a discussion on YouTube. That would be incredible.
Absolutely. If he contacts me, I will bring you in for the discussion. Definitely.
I have a weird feeling he will because you live in that world.
I do live in that world, and it would be fantastic if he showed up. But of course, the other one, of course, is Nicholas Flamel, who around that time as well was supposedly the creator of the Philosopher's Stone and was using it to brew an elixir of immortality. So he was living forever as well. So these themes were playing around in Victorian Europe at that time.
It's because they feared death so much. This was a concept that was so much in people's minds. That's one of the, one would argue that the two layers of Victorianism, which is both the extreme pretense of morality and the libertinism hidden beneath, are both coming from a fear of death.
Mm-hmm. And we see that in Dorian Gray. He's completely terrified of his own mortality, and literally takes the one thing that basically protects his immortality and locks it behind as many barriers as he can possibly conceive of to prevent anyone from being able to touch his, to make him mortal again. And I think that very much speaks to the terror that he has in himself of having to face everything he's done. In a lot of ways, he's almost like how younger children, when they make a mistake, they try to find elaborate ways to cover it up or hide it or lie about it.
Sure, I did it.
Of course, we all did, right? I mean, and there it is, right? We are literally seeing somebody who has not matured and is still trying to hide his mistakes, not only from other people, but from himself.
So it's interesting because you've referenced the Wiccan tradition. I'm going to bring in now the Islamic tradition.
Absolutely, please.
So on that exact point that you just raised, there is a verse in the Quran that talks about the hypocritical holy people. The hypocrisy is actually considered the worst in Islam. To pretend to be righteous and to be is the worst. It's the bottom, right? It's one level to be unrighteous. The worst is the person that pretends to be. We can see that nothing repels us more than the person that made a public persona and is the opposite of it. It repels us on a visceral level. And so the Quran is very condemnatory of people that pretend to be holy because they bring all of religion into disrepute, right? Exactly. And so, but it specifically talks about these people saying that they will say, we are the beloved ones of God. We are the sons of God. We are beloved by him. And if that were so, then you should long for death. That's the Quran saying. If that you really believe that, you should long for death. It says, but they will never long for death because of what their own hands have sent in front of them. So what the deeds that they've done have already been sent waiting for them. They won't long for death, because they know what their own deeds are, right?
Exactly.
And that's exactly this concept of the people that talk the most about this are the ones that fear their own actions the most.
Mm-hmm. It actually strikes me whenever I run across a commonality between religions, it always makes me feel fantastic because for us, the cycle of life is absolutely sacred. We are born, we live, we die, we are reborn into the next generation. And to choose to try to remove oneself from that cycle is more or less a perversion of our beliefs. So I find it very fascinating that both religions go, no, being a part of that cycle of life is so precious, is so important that we should embrace it. And we should be happy that we have a limited amount of time so that we treat those times that we do have as precious moments.
You hit another profound issue, which also brings us to the movie. But the Sufis in Islamic tradition, Sufi mystics, like what I aspire to be, they are very much told, don't go live in the mountains. Don't be a yogi out in the mountains. Sufism only works if you're living in society, have a job, have a family. There's no test of your journey until you're in those situations. And so in the Quran, monasticism is criticized. It's not forbidden. It is just critiqued as saying, it specifically says that within the Christian tradition, it critiques the Christian tradition. Forgive me, any of my Christian friends. I'm just sharing you what my book said.
Critique in love is completely
critique in love. It said because it actually honors, the Quran actually honors monks several times, says because of their devotion to God. But it also critiques and says, we did not teach Jesus this, right? So this is something that the Quran claims Jesus did not teach monasticism, but his followers invented. Some of them did very good things with it. But he says that's not something that was actually revealed, and it's not something that's required of you. And so it is very rare for Muslims to be celibate, it's considered unnatural. You have to be, you should be in the flow of life. Otherwise, you're not experiencing God at all.
Exactly. We actually feel the same way about that a lot, because when you remove yourself from the people that you are trying to help, are you truly helping them? Now, I'm sure there are some situations where that level of dedication, that level of focus would absolutely be required. I mean, some works that Christian monks have done are absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, they had to lock themselves up for years to create these incredible manuscripts and other things. Yeah,
exactly. Or even just like somebody like Thomas Aquinas, who literally had to lock himself down and just think deeply about what the Bible was trying to teach him and bring that forward. It's fascinating. It's just, I can totally see why it's both a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways.
Well, it's all about whether it becomes your entire existence, which is what Dorian faces. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. There's nothing wrong with pleasure and having an enjoyable life. It's all about whether it becomes your only thing. Even like I said, Islam does not promote monasticism, but Sufis are very much encouraged to do seclusions. Go out, spend 40 days like Jesus did in the desert. Go out and 40 days alone from the world, meditate, but then come back. Come back
and share what you've learned with your brothers and your sisters.
Yeah,
exactly. And this is what I try to do with my channel right here, right now, is because both of us have very different backgrounds, but we can sit down and see that at its core, both faiths are trying to teach, be nice to others, be kind when possible. The only differences we run into are more cultural about how one defines nice. But
there's a range of historical circumstances, but there is a central morality that's intuitive.
Exactly. And when we approach each other with respect and say, this is how my culture defines nice. This is what I'm understanding your culture defines as nice. Let's find common ground.
What are the underlying principles?
Things.
Yeah. Once you find the underlying principles, you can relate, right, to the external things. And the underlying principles of the picture of Dorian Gray are very much about, embracing your humanity, which is embracing pain, embracing change, embracing loss, embracing suffering. All of those things Dorian tries to project out of him and loses his humanity in the process.
Exactly. And ultimately he pays the price for this life. That is the choice of what he has done. This is the consequences of it. Kamran, I really appreciate you coming in to see this. I was actually very surprised that you hadn't already seen the movie, because it seemed like something right up your alley.
I hadn't seen this one. I think there wasn't one. Even I think Angela Lansbury, God rest her soul, she did one back in the 50s maybe. So this
47. I think it was.
This has been made many times. So this 2009 movie, it's I found it's initially I couldn't difficulty finding it. I did eventually find it. It's on Amazon. If anyone wants to watch it, Amazon Prime, you can rent it or view it there. It's worth watching. Ben Barnes and Colin Firth is absolutely
fantastic.
I mean, I'm surprised I didn't hear about him getting any awards for this thing.
He should have.
Performance.
So I do want to thank you so much for appearing with me. I hope we do more things like this in the future.
Inshallah, God willing, soon.
Absolutely. And if you could please plug your Patreon for my people here, because it's fantastic.
Well, it means a lot to me. You've been very active on it. Koryon's been a member for a long time and very active, putting a lot of insightful comments. So I have a Patreon, and I'm sure you can drop in a link.
I absolutely.
On the video when we release it. But yeah, it's just Patreon/Kamran Pasha, I believe, Kamran Pasha 72, something like that. The link will be there. But yeah, on my Patreon, I've got a few hundred subscribers now, which is great. And it's become very much a community. It's not just me posting my ideas. Everyone is very active on it, sharing ideas, debating. It's very respectful debate. We've had a range of disagreements, but it's never been attacking people personally, which is my rule. And you can completely think somebody's off the rocker, just express why rather than make them an attack on them. And that's how the Patrons were working. But it's me sharing my insights into Hollywood. I just today, last 2 days, I've been posting about these developments with Warner Brothers. They have again, a workshop that was done for minority writers and directors that unfortunately was canceled this week, and then after much uproar was brought back in, but then was brought back in under diversity initiatives, which is often just putting to the side. But I've had this kind of conversation about what that workshop meant for me. I went through that workshop at Warner Brothers. It changed me as a writer, made me a better writer, and now we're having this incredible discussion about diversity and inclusion and what that means and what's good, what doesn't work on this Patreon. So you'll get insights from my perspective. I've got subscribers, members who are Disney employees who share inside information that I post pretty regularly. So it's a fun place, and it's a chance to have a private conversation with respectful people.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you so much for coming out. And I do hope, again, we get to do more things like this and wonderful projects in the future together.
We will.
In the meantime, I have a little bit of a tradition to end the video on. So usually when I end a video, I will blatantly say that this video is ended, and merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take care, everybody.